Now, the Caseys then sold to a very prominent person who came to town, and this was Mr. John Worthington and his family of one daughter and his wife, of course. John Worthington was originally from Baltimore, Maryland. He became a partner. First, he was operating a distillery in Pennsylvania. Then, after operating a distillery there, he became a partner in a distillery in Bellevue, Ohio, and a bank. Then he decided to come to Toledo, and he continued, of course, his interest in the bank operation over in Bellevue. But he was a very wealthy man. This handsome home was available for sale, and so he bought it to be a residence for himself, his wife, and their one daughter. Their daughter Their daughter was Hannah Matilda Worthington. She apparently did not care for the Hannah, because we find her listed often in various listings or biographies as H. Matilda Worthington. So anyway, it just happened that she met a young man who lived several blocks north of here. His father was the leading realtor in town, George Pomeroy Sr. Well, she met George Pomeroy Jr., and they were married in this house. So this brings us to the Pomeroys. When the elder Worthingtons passed away, it's very interesting because again in the city directory, we have the younger Pomeroys are here as residents in the house. Then when the elder Pomeroy passes away, or Mr. Worthington, I should say, when Mr. Worthington passes away, suddenly the ownership of the house is George Pomeroy, and Mrs. Worthington, the mother-in-law, is a tenant. She's a resident in the house, not the owner any longer. But anyway, it became the Pomeroy home for 40 years. It was a very, very special home to these families, indeed. Well, the Pomeroys were here for 40 years. And then what happened next, they were ready to retire, and they were ready for a smaller home. And so they went to an apartment over on Parkwood Avenue in the Old West End. Now, what happened is, on this block was, of course, the original St. John's Jesuit High School, which then developed and evolved into a Jesuit college, St. John's College, for a number of years. And so, thus it was, the Carrington home began as the high school. And they had several priests who were the teachers. And then what they did was they started with a freshman year, then they added a year as the others were promoted each year to the senior year. Well, then at that point, they decided to go ahead and continue developing it as a Jesuit college. So then they built a large building down the street because they'd outgrown the Carrington home, and they also then joined the two, the old home at one point and the main college building. So it was quite a sight indeed in its day. Now, of course, you can't really see this at a distance, I know, but if you're interested, I can show it to you later when you have time. But here was the Carrington home, and this was behind this house. And then here was the large building of the Jesuit college, and then this connected in between. That was part of the college as well. Since there was so much artwork and sculpture here, this became Pomeroy Hall, and it was the fine arts building for the Jesuit college. Now, what happened to St. John's College, you might ask? Well, what happened was the Depression came. And when the Depression came, well, people couldn't afford to send their sons to this college. And so the enrollment dropped off considerably. And finally, it was getting rather sad, and so finally they decided what they would do is open it as a co-ed institution, and it became DeSales College. However, with the addition of the women, the co-eds in the college, that seemed to work. But then what happened? World War II, and they lost most of the male students. And again, they were in the red. And so that was the end of that. The buildings were torn down some years later. They stood for many years on the block. But that is why today you have all this green space out here. That is where the other part of the college was. Then I might add, over on the far distant corner, it's still standing, the old Westminster Presbyterian Church. And what happened was the college bought that because the church built in a different part of the city, and the church bought the Westminster Church and turned it into a gymnasium. And of course, St. John's always takes great pride, as the high school today, of its basketball team. Well, that was the original St. John's Gymnasium over there. And so anyway, the building is still standing, but I don't think it has any use now, does it? No. So anyway, but that is the history of this block and this house. And there's...
You didn't mention the nuns, though.
Oh, yes. Well, I thought you might want to mention that in yours, but I'll mention the fact. It also, what happened was with the closing of the college, this became a convent for a number of years. And so it was a convent as well, and Sue will show you what was their chapel. And so they have, as she'll tell you, have made good use of the chapel, and they've had weddings here, small weddings. Work beautifully in the house. And so they've done a great deal, and they have annual teas to be a fundraiser for this house and for the Vistula restoration projects. And I recommend them highly. And I can even show you, well, I've got it in a different, I can show you when we're walking around. Got a beautiful picture of some relatives of mine, and they love to come to the teas here. And they have these old Victorian outfits and these Victorian hats, and they come in full regalia and live the spirit of the old house. It's great. Well, anyway, oh yes, yes, we cannot forget this wonderful connection here. Mr. Pomeroy was so important in the business world that he was put on the committee of businessmen to try to encourage businesses from out of the state and out of the city to come to Toledo. And they were trying their best to promote Toledo for new businesses. And he was on the committee that learned that Mr. Edward Drummond Libby of what was then the New England Glass Company was looking for a place where he could obtain cheaper fuel, because the New England Glass Company was in East Cambridge, Massachusetts. And the Boston area is not exactly a coal belt or natural gas area. And as a result, all of the early New England glass had to be made by importing firewood from Maine. And you had to buy the expensive firewood, and then you had to pay for the shipping down to East Cambridge. And this had been a problem for that glass company for a number of years, because the workers were course, demanding more pay. But the company was facing difficulty because it's a matter of trying to afford the wood for the fuel and to pay the workers. And so Mr. Libby was looking for a place. He had heard that in the Ohio Valley there's a lot of coal, and that that might be a good possibility. Well, this business committee in Toledo contacted Mr. Libby, invited him to come here. Now the year is about 1888, and in the 1880s they started striking oil all over the place down in Wood County. We had a big oil boom. And then down in Hancock County, around Findlay, they were striking natural gas. And so this group decided, they made an offer to Mr. Libby. They would raise money if he would come to Toledo and buy him a plant site for his glass factory, and they would have a gas line built right from the gas fields in Hancock County right up here to the factory. Well, he came to town. He liked what he saw. Mr. Pomeroy was the man that took him out to look at a possible plant site. Mr. Pomeroy liked the one especially over on Champlain Street. And, well, Mr. Libby was impressed with it also. And that became, and still is, the home of Libby Glass over there on Champlain and down near Buckeye Street. Now, while they were meeting one day, cementing the deal on the property in Mr. Pomeroy's office downtown, this was down on a ground floor. Mr. Libby's looking out the window. It must have been a beautiful day like this. And he saw this very, very beautiful young lady walk by. And he looked. He was a bachelor, by the way. And he said to Mr. Pomeroy, "Who is that attractive young woman?" Lovely creature. and
Here's a picture of it.
And he said, "Why, that's Florence Scott. She is from one of Toledo's very prominent and a pioneer family here." And Mr. Libby said, "I must meet her." Now this story is told, and the footnotes, the story was told by Mr. Libby's sister, Sally Libby. And so you can't get a better authority. So that must be the true story of what brought Mr. Libby here to Toledo, because Mr. Pomeroy told his wife, "We've got to have a dinner party." And gather some friends, and we're going to have a dinner party and invite Florence Scott. And so the Libbys, Florence Scott and Edward Drummond Libby, met, probably in the parlor here. And of course, the rest is history. And as I said, when I found that story and gave it to her, I said, "Just think, without this house, we may not have had an art museum like we have." So there. So Sue, take it from there.
So, in I come. It wasn't so glorious here. This house had been vacant for 8 years and unheated before. Then go to the